Karma at the altar. My sister's cruel plan led to her public jilting. My sister, Lena, invited me to be a bridesmaid at her wedding, but it wasn't an honor. It was a meticulously planned ambush designed to humiliate me in front of 300 guests. What she didn't realize was that her elaborate scheme would backfire so spectacularly, costing her everything. Lena and I were never close growing up. She was the golden child, the perfect one, always getting the bigger bedroom with the better window. I was just Mia, the younger sister, constantly feeling like an afterthought. When I turned 25, I finally moved 3 states away for a job. Honestly, that distance did more for our relationship than anything else ever had. We started texting, talking, truly connecting. For the first time in my life, I genuinely wondered if we could be real sisters. Then she met Ethan. The name hit me like a weird echo. Ethan was a guy I'd gone on 3 incredibly awkward coffee dates with back in college. We both knew there was zero chemistry, so we mutually ghosted. When Lena told me she was dating an Ethan and showed me his photo, I actually chuckled. I reminded her of our failed coffee dates years ago. The line went silent on her end. I quickly assured her it meant nothing, that I barely remembered him, and she seemed to accept it. 6 months later, they were engaged, and Lena asked me to be her maid of honor. I was genuinely touched. I took time off work, flew home for every single event, spent way too much money on her bachelorette party, and I did it all with absolute joy. I truly believed we were finally becoming the sisters I'd always dreamed of. Then, a month before the wedding, Lena called me completely distraught. She said one of her bridesmaids had dropped out due to a family emergency, leaving the numbers uneven. She asked if my best friend, Emma, could step in last minute. Emma, being the amazing person she is, said yes. Lena seemed so grateful. She told Emma about her champagne and gold color scheme and emailed her a link to the exact outfit she wanted her to wear. Emma, trusting her, ordered it immediately. I traveled home the week before the wedding, staying with our parents. Lena was nervous, irritable, but I just chalked it up to normal wedding anxiety. The morning of the ceremony, all the bridesmaids gathered at the venue to get ready. Emma and I walked in, and my stomach instantly dropped. Every single bridesmaid was in a deep burgundy dress. Every single one, except Emma, who stood out glaringly in champagne gold, looking like she'd wandered into the wrong wedding. Lena entered from the wedding suite in her robe, a smug, contented expression on her face. She immediately launched into a loud tirade, directed at me, but aimed at everyone in the room. "I knew Rachel would try something," she shrieked, referring to her college friend who had inexplicably taken over as maid of honor for me just a week before. "She's been envious of me and Ethan from the beginning." Lena accused me, in front of everyone, of being infatuated with Ethan for years, of trying to sabotage their relationship, and of deliberately putting Emma in the wrong dress to cause trouble on her wedding day. I stood there, frozen. Then Emma, bless her heart, pulled out her phone. She showed everyone the text thread with Lena, the link to the champagne dress and Lena's message, "This is perfect. Order it ASAP." The room fell silent. Lena's face contorted. She started screaming that I must have fabricated the text, that I was always envious of her, that I wanted her life. Her college roommate tried to calm her, but Lena shoved her away, pointing a furious finger at me, claiming I had undoubtedly slept with Ethan, and that this was all part of my plan. That's when Ethan walked in. He'd heard the shouting from the corridor, where the guys were getting ready. He looked at Lena, then at me, then back at her, and simply asked what was going on. Lena ran to him, weeping, spewing accusations about me trying to ruin everything. She clung to him, declaring her love. Ethan just stared. "I told you 100 times, he said, his voice flat. Nothing ever happened between us. We had 3 lousy dates 6 years ago. He sounded utterly exhausted. "I'm tired of you constantly bringing it up." He then revealed everything. She'd forced him to ban me on social media. She searched his phone weekly for messages from me. She accused him of thinking about me during their most intimate moments. The room was absolutely silent. Lena's weeping intensified as she desperately declared her love and fear of losing him. Ethan took a step back, away from her outstretched hand. He looked at her, his eyes filled with a chilling mix of sadness and finality. "I can't do this anymore," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "I've ignored the warning signs for too long, thinking you'd settle down after the wedding." He apologized, but told her he couldn't marry someone who trusted him so little. Then he simply walked out. Lena sank to the floor, sobbing uncontrollably, her bridesmaids staring helplessly around her. I took Emma's hand and we just left. We drove to a diner, ordered pancakes, and there I sat in my burgundy bridesmaid dress, having breakfast at 11 a.m. on what was supposed to be my sister's wedding day. My phone rang for hours with calls from my parents, Lena, and other relatives, all demanding to know what happened. I switched it off and ordered more coffee. For months later, my mom told me Lena had started therapy. Then, Lena herself texted me. She wanted to meet for lunch. "I have something crucial to tell you about Ethan," she wrote. "Something you deserve to know from the start." My gut twisted into knots. What could she possibly tell me now that mattered? Ethan walked out of that wedding 4 months ago. I honestly thought that was the end of it. I reread the message a 12th time, the words blurring on the screen. I grabbed my phone and dialed Emma. I didn't even say hello before launching into Lena's message, my hands trembling. Emma's response was immediate and firm. "Do not see her alone. This could be another setup." We talked for 30 minutes, going in circles, finally agreeing that if I went, she would come with me as backup. I thanked her, hung up, and spent the rest of the evening staring at my phone, my mind racing through every possible scenario Lena could reveal. I slept poorly, waking every few hours to check for another message. There was none. The next day at work dragged, spreadsheets meaningless as my mind churned. That evening I called Emma again, and she reiterated, "You don't owe Lena anything. Just ignore it." But something about Lena's phrasing, "deserved to know from the beginning," made me believe this was truly important. After 4 days of driving myself insane with curiosity, I finally texted Lena back. I told her I'd meet her for lunch at a neutral spot, the Riverside Cafe, halfway between our parents' house and my apartment. And I made it clear I was bringing Emma. She could take it or leave it. I pressed send before I could second-guess myself, then immediately wanted to hurl my phone across the room. Less than 5 minutes later, my phone vibrated. Lena's response. She accepted my conditions without argument or pushback. My jaw dropped. The old Lena, before the wedding fiasco, would have insisted on just the two of us, desperate to control the narrative. This quick acceptance, letting Emma come, unnerved me in a new way. Had Lena truly changed, or was this a new, more subtle manipulation? I shared the text with Emma. 3 question marks was her only reply. We planned to meet at my apartment an hour before lunch. The morning of, I woke up feeling like I was about to throw up. I barely managed half a slice of toast. Emma arrived right on time, took one look at my face, and pulled me into a hug. "We can still cancel," she said gently. "We can drive to the beach instead." But I shook my head, grabbed my jacket. I needed to hear what Lena had to say, even if it screwed me up all over again. Emma drove. My hands were too shaky. For 30 minutes, she kept up a constant stream of conversation. Her job, her annoying coworker, anything but the lunch we were heading towards. Every few minutes, she'd remind me, "We can leave whenever you want. You're in control." We arrived 15 minutes early, taking a back corner table that offered a view of the door. I ordered a coffee I wouldn't drink, Emma a tea she wouldn't touch. We waited in tight stillness, watching every person who entered. When Lena finally stepped in, right around lunchtime, I barely recognized her. She'd lost at least 18 pounds, maybe more, and looked utterly fatigued. Her face was gaunt, her clothes hung loosely, and dark bags under her eyes defied any makeup. She spotted us immediately, walking over hesitantly, as if unsure we wouldn't just stand up and leave. She sat in the empty chair across from me, not ordering. Her hands trembled as she folded them on the table. She opened her lips twice before speaking, her voice shaking almost as much as her hands. She started by apologizing for everything: the wedding, the allegations, the dress setup, the entire misery she'd caused me. She explained that her therapist, Hannah, had been helping her understand her intense jealousy, how it had destroyed her relationship with Ethan and damaged her connection with me. I sat there, silent, just listening, trying to process the reality that my sister was taking responsibility for her actions. Lena continued, explaining that Ethan had told her about our 3 college dates on their second date. She'd been consumed by it ever since. She admitted to making him ban me on social media, constantly checking his phone, and accusing him of thinking about me during intimate moments. Her voice broke as she described how her constant distrust had pushed him away. The dress arrangement, she confessed, wasn't a last-minute panic. She'd planned the sabotage for weeks. She wanted to show everyone, especially Ethan, that I was trying to ruin her wedding. She truly believed that if she could make me look awful in front of all those people, Ethan would finally realize I was the problem, not her jealousy. She thought shaming me would solve everything. Lena was openly weeping now, tears streaming down her face. Under the table, Emma squeezed my hand so hard it nearly hurt. I took a deep breath and asked the question that had been burning in my mind since her text. Why are you telling me all this now? And what's the crucial information about Ethan? Because you haven't told me anything I didn't already know or couldn't have guessed. Lena took a deep, shuddering breath, wiping her eyes with a napkin that was already disintegrating. She revealed that Ethan had tried multiple times to invite me to spend time with them as a couple. He wanted to prove there was nothing between us, to show her we could all be normal. But every time he suggested it, she rejected him, accusing him of trying to cheat. She'd scream at him for hours, telling him he was humiliating her by making her watch him flirt with me. Ethan would try to explain he only wanted her to understand how platonic our past was, but she couldn't hear him. She was so consumed by jealousy that any mention of my name sent her into a frenzy. She shifted in her seat, speaking faster, as if needing to get it all out. 6 months before the wedding, Ethan had proposed couples therapy. He was worried about her jealousy and believed a professional could help them work through it. Lena refused, blaming him for not understanding her feelings. She convinced herself that his suggestion of therapy meant he was going to leave her for me. In her twisted mind, therapy was his way of prepping her for the breakup, so he wouldn't feel guilty about running off with me. She admitted it made no sense, but at the time it felt perfectly genuine and reasonable. Ethan tried to explain therapy would benefit them both, that it wasn't about blame, but she shut down any discussion. The waitress came to refill our water glasses, and Lena fell silent, composing herself. Then, she looked directly at me. "The important information I wanted to tell you," she said, her voice barely a whisper, "is that Ethan never had any romantic feelings for you. Not even a tiny bit." She claimed her therapist helped her understand she had created an entire scenario in her brain that had no basis in reality. Ethan never looked at me in a special way, never mentioned me until she brought it up, and never gave her any reason to believe he wanted me. She had built a delusion where I was secretly in love with him, and he with me, and only she saw the truth. I sat there, utterly stunned. I'd expected some bombshell, some genuine secret. Instead, it was just her confirming what I already knew, what everyone else at the wedding had known. "I could have told you that myself," I said, my voice flat. "I was there for those 3 awkward coffee meetings where we discussed economics homework and concluded we had nothing in common. The first time he showed me his photo, I barely remembered him. I had to think for a while before recognizing who he was." Lena nodded. "I understand that now," she said. "But I spent years creating a dream where you were secretly in love with Ethan, trying to steal him away. I convinced myself you moved 3 states away just to make Ethan miss you. my career opportunity, my desire for independence. In her mind, all irrelevant. Everything I did was part of an intricate scheme to convince Ethan he preferred me. She described staying awake at night, picturing scenarios where Ethan would recall our coffee dates and realize I was his soulmate. Her therapist, she explained, helped her see she was projecting her own anxieties onto us, creating a villain in her tale. To avoid confronting her own fears of not being good enough, Emma finally spoke, her voice sharper than I'd ever heard it. Why did you replace Mia as maid of honor 2 weeks before the wedding? The question hung in the air. I realized I'd almost forgotten that detail. Lena stared down at the table, her cheeks flushing with shame. She admitted she was worried Grace, my college roommate and original MOH, would support me when she enacted her dress sabotage plot. Grace knew us both well, and Lena feared she would speak up and wreck the entire plan. So, Lena fabricated a story about needing someone who understood her vision better and demoted Grace to a regular bridesmaid. Grace was hurt and bewildered, but accepted it to avoid pre-wedding drama. Rage started to build in my chest, a boiling water filling a jar. This wasn't a wedding day panic attack or stress-induced psychosis. Lena had been plotting to humiliate me for weeks, even months. She meticulously planned the dress colors, the timing, the arrangement with Emma. She switched her maid of honor precisely to ensure no one would defend me when she made her accusations in front of everyone. Every element was deliberate, vicious, designed to make me look like the villain in her twisted fantasy. I remembered all those phone calls leading up to the wedding, where she sounded so appreciative, so happy that we were getting closer. It was all a facade while she devised this elaborate trap. Lena reached across the table to grab my hand, but I yanked it away before she could touch me. She started weeping harder, tears streaming down her face faster than she could wipe them. I understand if you never forgive me, she choked out. I wouldn't forgive myself if I were in your situation. But I needed you to know the truth about how twisted my thinking had gotten. Her therapist, Hannah, was helping her understand the need to take full responsibility, not just apologize and expect things to be okay. She knew she'd damaged both our relationship and her connection with Ethan, all because of problems that existed solely in her imagination. Have you had any contact with Ethan since the wedding? I asked, my voice chillingly flat, even to my own ears. Lena shook her head, more tears falling onto the table. Ethan had blocked her number that day. She'd learned through a mutual friend that he'd moved away a month later. She didn't blame him. She'd put him through hell, accusing him of things he never did, restricting who he could talk to, monitoring his phone like a detective searching for a crime that never occurred. She confessed that leaving the wedding was probably the best thing he ever did, even if it crushed her at the time. Emma chimed in, Have you apologized to Ethan for what you put him through? Lena wiped her face with her sleeve before slowly nodding. She'd sent him a letter through her therapist about a month ago. Hannah helped her write something that took responsibility without making excuses or asking for anything in return. She mailed it to his new address, unsure if he'd ever read it. She hoped he did, because he needed to know none of it was his fault, that he did nothing wrong. But she didn't expect or want a reply. She just wanted him to know. She realized how terribly she'd treated him. I pushed my chair away from the table, my legs wobbly, and stood up. I need time to process what you've told me, I said, my voice exhausted. I'm not ready to forgive you or re-establish our relationship. Lena nodded, wiping her face with a now soggy tissue. She'd expected that, but hoped that one day I might be willing to try. Emma stepped up beside me, placing a hand on my shoulder, a quiet reminder that it was time to leave. As we prepared to depart, Lena mentioned she'd apologized to Grace for the dress debacle. She looked at Emma, her eyes red and puffy. I know it won't change anything, but I wanted Emma to know I was sorry too. Emma accepted the apology, but warned Lena that fixing what she'd caused for both of us would take more than just saying sorry. Her tone was courteous, but firm, and I was so grateful she was there. I doubt I could have managed that conversation alone. We walked out of the cafe into the blazing afternoon sun. It felt surreal given the heavy weight of everything. Emma and I drove home in silence for 30 minutes until I burst into tears. Big, ugly sobs racked my entire body. Emma pulled into a gas station parking lot and just sat with me, letting me cry into my hands. I wasn't sure if I was crying from rage, relief, or sadness for the sister connection I'd thought we were building. Perhaps all three, mixed into something I couldn't quite describe. Emma didn't try to stop me or tell me everything would be fine. She just offered tissues from the glove box and waited for me to breathe normally again. When I finally calmed down enough to speak, I told her I didn't know what to do with all this information. Knowing Lena had planned everything, deliberately setting up that dress situation to embarrass me, somehow made it worse. Emma said we didn't need to sort things out right now. We could just go home, watch crappy TV, and eat ice cream. That sounded perfect. I nodded, and she drove back onto the road. That evening, my mother called to ask how lunch went. Lena had already told her we met. I gave her a quick synopsis, sitting on my couch with a pint of chocolate ice cream. Mom listened without interrupting, then let out a deep sigh. She and Dad, she confessed, had been concerned about Lena's mental health for years, but never knew how to confront it. This shocked me. My parents never talked about Lena's struggles when we were kids. Mom claimed they saw things but assumed she'd outgrow them. She hadn't. What did you see? I asked. There was a long pause. Mom confessed that Lena had similar jealousy issues with her high school boyfriend, accusing his female friends of trying to steal him. She was constantly calling him, checking where he was, who he was with. They'd hoped she'd outgrow it, but the problems were deeper. I sat there, clutching my phone, realizing I never knew any of this. Mom said they didn't want to label Lena or make her feel bad, so they just urged the boyfriend to be patient. He eventually broke up with her because the jealousy was too much. I told Mom I wished someone had warned Ethan about this tendency before he got engaged. Mom's voice dropped. They'd considered it, she said, but didn't want to interfere with Lena's relationship. She sounded regretful, as if she now realized she should have said something. We talked for another 30 minutes before I said I had to go. After we hung up, I sat in the dark, reflecting on how many people had seen the warning signs, yet said nothing. 2 weeks after the lunch, I received a text from Ryan Foster, Ethan's closest friend from the wedding. I recognized his name from the guest list, remembered him standing with the groomsmen that morning. He asked if we could chat because Ethan wanted to contact me but wasn't sure if it was okay. My initial reaction was that this was strange, but then I remembered Ethan was also a victim in all of this. Sure, we can talk, I wrote back. Ryan suggested we meet for coffee the next day near my apartment. The next afternoon, I walked into a small coffee shop. Ryan was already seated at a corner table. He was tall, with dark hair, and looked exhausted, as if he hadn't slept properly in months. We shook hands, and I sat across from him. Ryan explained that Ethan felt terrible that I'd been dragged into Lena's accusations and wanted to apologize for not defending me more aggressively that day. He said Ethan had been beating himself up over it for months, replaying the morning over and over. I told Ryan that Ethan didn't owe me an apology. He was dealing with his own personal hell at the time. Ryan nodded, but said Ethan wanted me to know he wished he'd handled things better. He pulled out his phone and showed me a text from Ethan, essentially saying the same thing. Ryan revealed that Ethan had almost called off the wedding the week before, but his parents persuaded him to try again. They told him every relationship has issues and marriage would fix things. Ethan knew it was bad, but he loved Lena and wanted to believe she might change. Ryan said Ethan regretted not trusting his intuition and leaving sooner. He believed if he'd ended things quietly before the wedding, I wouldn't have been pulled into the turmoil. I appreciated Ethan thinking of me, but I told Ryan that Lena would have found another reason to blame me for the breakup. Her issues weren't really about me or Ethan. They were about whatever was going on in her own mind. I asked Ryan if Ethan knew about the dress arrangement plan. Absolutely not, he said firmly. Ethan was stunned when he walked into that room and heard what Lena was saying about me. Ryan claimed Ethan had no idea Lena gave Emma the wrong dress color on purpose. He assumed it was an honest mistake until he saw how pleased Lena looked when she started making accusations. That's when it all clicked for him, and he knew how far gone she was. Ryan leaned back in his chair. Ethan spent the entire morning getting ready, thinking about how to bring up his concerns about the relationship one more time. He never imagined he'd walk in on a planned attack. I believed Ryan. Ethan's face that morning had shown real confusion and horror. Ryan gave me Ethan's new phone number. Ethan would like to apologize directly if you're open to it. He jotted it down on a napkin and slid it across the table. I took the number, but told Ryan half of me wanted to talk to Ethan and clear the air, but the other half thought it might be best to leave things in the past. Ryan understood and encouraged me to take my time. We drank our coffee and chatted about other topics for a while, just typical conversation about work and life. It was good to have a casual chat that didn't involve wedding drama or family issues. Ryan offered me a brief hug as we left, saying he hoped I was doing well. "I'm working on it," I replied, which felt like the most honest answer I could give. I spent the next month immersing myself in work, taking on extra assignments to keep my mind from spiraling. Emma checked in every few days. One Friday, she arrived at my apartment with 2 packed bags and declared we were going to the beach for the weekend. I didn't fight her. I knew she was right. I needed to get away. We drove 3 hours to a small seaside town, staying in a slightly shabby hotel room that smelled of salt water and old carpet. We spent Saturday walking along the beach. Emma let me talk about everything, without interrupting or trying to fix it. I told her how strange it was that my sister's mental health crisis had become the defining point of my year. I was angry at Lena, but also sad for her. I wasn't sure if I'd ever trust her again, even if she got better. Emma just listened and nodded, occasionally tossing shells into the waves. Sunday morning, as we sat on the beach eating donuts and watching the sunrise, I noticed my chest wasn't constricted for the first time in weeks. When we drove home that afternoon, I felt like I might actually be able to do more than just survive. The next week, I was sitting at my desk, staring at Ethan's phone number. I'd picked up my phone a dozen times and put it down, unsure what to say. But then, I remembered how he'd stormed out of the wedding and presumably spent months dealing with his own problems. Perhaps we both deserved to clear the air. I wrote him a text, "Hello. Would you like to chat sometime?" He replied within an hour, saying yes, and gave me his new number, which he'd changed after everything. We scheduled a call for Thursday evening. I spent the next 3 days terrified about speaking with someone I hardly knew. When Thursday arrived, I nearly canceled 5 times. But at 7 o'clock, I dialed his number. He answered on the second ring. The first few minutes were so uncomfortable, I almost faked bad reception and hung up. But then Ethan said he'd wanted to apologize to me for months, and the conversation suddenly became easier. He told me he felt bad that I was brought into Lena's accusations, and that he should have defended me more aggressively in that moment, rather than just defending himself. I could detect genuine shame in his voice, which helped me feel less alone in this circumstance. Ethan began discussing how he'd ignored so many warning signs because Lena was flawless in every other way. He described her as caring, supportive, hilarious. He convinced himself her jealousy was just insecurity that would disappear once they were married, once she felt more secure in the relationship. He believed that if he demonstrated his allegiance enough times, banned me on social media as she requested, allowed her to check his phone whenever she wanted, she would finally trust him. He now confessed he was mistaken to believe marriage would solve her difficulties and wished he'd seen the pattern sooner. I listened to him talk about constantly checking in with her when he was out with friends, about avoiding female coworkers because it upset her, and about the time she accused him of thinking about me during sex. And he actually tried to convince her that wasn't true, rather than acknowledging how ridiculous the accusation had been. He sounded utterly fatigued just describing it all, and I realized he'd been drowning in that relationship long before the wedding. I told Ethan he didn't need to apologize. He was coping with his own crisis that morning, and I didn't blame him for his reaction. I explained that I was only collateral damage in Lena's problems. He was the true object of all the jealousy and control. We ended up talking for over an hour. I learned he was a genuinely kind guy who got himself into a horrible situation with someone he cared about deeply. He told me of his remorse for leaving Lena weeping on the floor, how his parents were upset with him for humiliating the family, and how half of their mutual acquaintances supported her because they couldn't believe lovely Lena would do something so planned. He moved to a new city 2 months after the wedding fiasco because he couldn't bear running into people who knew them as a couple. I felt protective of him, even though we were virtually strangers, because I'd been blamed for Lena's troubles before. Ethan mentioned he started therapy shortly after the wedding, working through his own trust issues and learning to recognize dangerous relationship patterns before they became too severe. His therapist helped him see he'd been in a dominating relationship and was unaware of it because Lena's control was disguised as love and care. He claimed that leaving that wedding was the most difficult thing he had ever done, but it was also the wisest decision. Remaining, he said, would have ruined him in the long run. When he talked about it, I heard genuine conviction in him. Voice, as if he had finally realized that leaving was the correct decision, even though it was painful. He asked how I was doing with everything, and I admitted I was still digesting it all, debating whether I wanted to reestablish my relationship with Lena or just let it go. Ethan didn't offer advice, but he truly listened, and that felt more helpful than any advice could be. We concluded the call by agreeing to stay in touch as friends, which felt a little awkward given he was my sister's ex, and we'd had those 3 bad dates years ago. But it also felt healthy and honest. There was something liberating about talking to someone who knew precisely how Lena's jealousy felt on the inside. After we hung up, I sat on my couch, thinking about how strange life is, how the wedding tragedy introduced me to someone I wouldn't have known otherwise. I saved his new number on my phone under Ethan. No last name, no context, just a person who gets it. 3 months later, I was having coffee before work when my phone vibrated with a text from Lena. I hadn't heard from her in months, so I was curious. She asked if I'd be willing to meet again, stating she'd made significant progress in treatment and wanted to share what she'd learned about herself. I gazed at the message as my coffee cooled, trying to decide how I felt. Half of me wanted to ignore it and continue living my life without her turmoil, but another half was eager to hear what she had to say. I texted Emma, and she reiterated that I should do whatever felt right for me. I thought about it for 4 days, then finally replied to Lena. "Sure, I'll meet you," I wrote. "But this time I want to do it alone without Emma." I wanted to know if Lena and I could have a meaningful conversation without a buffer. We arranged to meet at the same cafe where we'd had lunch previously. As I walked in, Lena was already seated at a corner table. She looked genuinely healthier, as if she'd been sleeping well and eating regularly. Her hair was pulled back. She wore minimal makeup. Nothing like the flawlessly dressed version of the woman I grew up with. I sat across from her and ordered tea. For a few minutes, we made awkward small talk about the weather and our jobs. Then Lena took a deep breath. She told me she had been diagnosed with obsessive-compulsive disorder with relationship obsessions. Her therapist, Hannah, helped her see that the obsessive thoughts about me and Ethan weren't reasonable jealousy. They were a sign of OCD, which caused her brain to fixate on worries of abandonment and betrayal. She was now taking medication and practicing coping methods in therapy, and she said it was like someone had turned down the volume on the incessant, worried cacophony in her thoughts. Lena began to clarify that her jealousy was never directed specifically at me or Ethan. It was about an underlying anxiety of abandonment that stemmed from our childhood. She spoke about how we were constantly compared to each other, how she believed she needed to be flawless to be loved because any perceived defect meant I would be chosen over her. She claimed she internalized the belief that love was conditional and could be taken away if someone better came along. So, she tried to control everything to prevent that from happening. I sat there listening, realizing that while I'd spent our childhood feeling invisible next to her, she'd spent it feeling as if she was one mistake away from losing everything. We grew up in the same house, but had completely different experiences with our family, and neither of us realized what the other was going through. I took a deep breath. Lena, I have something to tell you too. Growing up, I often felt like I was under her shadow. She looked perplexed, so I explained that I was just the younger sister who wasn't as attractive or successful. I felt invisible next to her. Lena's expression shifted. I had no idea you felt that way, she said softly. I always assumed you had it easier, because there was less pressure on you. We sat there for a long time, talking about our childhood in ways we never had before. We both realized we had wasted years misunderstanding one another's experiences. She told me she felt she had to be flawless or lose our parents' affection, and I told her how I felt like nothing I did was important, because she had always done it better. It was the first time we'd had a completely honest conversation about being sisters. When we were about to leave, Lena asked if there was anything she could do to make up for everything, other than just saying sorry. I thought about it for a minute. The most important thing, I told her, is that you continue to go to therapy and work on your mental health. Not just for me, but for yourself. She agreed. Hannah has been helping me understand that my problems are more than just the wedding situation. We walked out to the parking lot and stood by our cars for a few minutes, just talking about everyday topics like work and the weather. Before we drove away, Lena suggested we try progressively mending our connection, perhaps meeting for coffee once a month to practice honestly communicating with each other. I agreed. No need to become great friends overnight, I said. We're just promising to try. She looked relieved and gave me a short embrace before leaving in her car. Driving home, I felt lighter than I had in months. Maybe we did have a chance, after all. A few days later, I was at my parents' house for Sunday dinner when my Uncle George approached me in the kitchen. He said he was proud of me for being willing to give Lena another opportunity while maintaining good boundaries. George had always been the wise one in our family. What you're doing, he told me, is what real forgiveness looks like. It's not about pretending nothing happened, but about choosing to move forward anyway. I told him I was worried Lena would revert to old behaviors. That's why boundaries are important, he said. You can support her progress without allowing her to hurt you again. We rejoined everyone in the dining room, and I noticed my parents watching Lena and me converse, a hopeful expression on their faces. They seemed almost terrified to trust that things might truly improve between us. 6 months passed. I was invited to another small family dinner at my parents' place. When I arrived, Lena was already there, helping Mom set the table. We greeted each other, striking up a casual discussion about a television show we both enjoyed. It wasn't perfect, and there were certainly some awkward pauses, but it felt real in a way our relationship never had before. We all settled down to eat, and Dad asked Lena about her new work, which she discussed without the phony enthusiasm she used to have, trying to convince everyone that everything was fine. Later, while we were cleaning dishes, Mom pulled me into the hallway, expressing her relief to see Lena and me chatting and laughing together. I could see she'd been genuinely worried we would never talk again after the wedding debacle. Throughout the evening, I found myself genuinely enjoying Lena's company, not pushing or acting, but truly finding her hilarious and intriguing. When I left, Lena escorted me to my vehicle and told me she'd started volunteering with a mental health advocacy organization. She revealed that she'd been sharing her experience at their meetings to help others identify compulsive relationship patterns before they damage their lives. I was amazed and impressed that she had turned her worst experience into something meaningful, that she was using what happened to benefit others. Hannah urged me to find a way to give back, she said, and it just felt right. I told her I thought she was incredibly brave, and she grinned, a different kind of smile than before, more genuine. A week later, I was at work when my phone vibrated with a text message from Ethan. I hadn't heard from him in months, so I was curious. The message said he'd started seeing someone new, and it was going great, and he wanted to thank me for being a supportive friend during his healing journey. I texted back, expressing my sincere happiness for him and asking how he'd been. He called me during my lunch break, and we spent 30 minutes talking about his life and his new partner. He sounded lighter, like he'd finally gotten over everything that happened with Lena. I informed him about Lena's improvement in therapy and the volunteer work she was doing. He said he was glad she was getting help, but he wasn't ready to make contact with her yet. I understood perfectly and told him he owed her nothing. Before we hung up, he expressed his hope that Lena and I could create something healthy together, adding that sisters were crucial. After the call, I sat in my car, reflecting on how bizarre it was that Ethan and I were now friends, despite hardly knowing each other before all of this happened. The wedding calamity had bonded us in an unusual manner. Both of us were victims of Lena's infatuation. That evening, as I prepared supper in my apartment, I began to reflect on the events of the past year. The wedding tragedy was one of the most terrible events of my life, seeing my sister blame me in front of everyone, then watching her relationship crumble. However, it also taught me valuable lessons about boundaries, forgiveness, and the distinction between enabling and supporting someone's development. I realized that ignoring or justifying someone else's actions would not solve their mental health problems. I learned that true love means being honest, even when it is difficult, and that sometimes the most compassionate thing you can do is let someone face the consequences of their actions. Lena and I will never have the ideal sister connection you see in movies, but we're creating something genuine and honest. We're learning to communicate without the anger and rivalry that characterized our youth. It's slow and often difficult, but it feels worthwhile. A year after the wedding that never happened, Lena texted me and asked if I wanted to go on a weekend vacation together. Just the two of us, no parents or other family members. An opportunity to spend actual time together. I was frightened about it, but I agreed. I figured if things became awkward, I could just drive home early. We booked a spa weekend at a resort 3 hours away and drove there on Friday afternoon. The first few hours were a touch awkward as we settled into our hotel room and learned how to simply be with each other for an extended amount of time. But by dinner that night, we were conversing freely, exchanging anecdotes about work, friends, and strange events in our lives. On Saturday, we had massages and relaxed in the hot tub, and Lena opened up about her therapy sessions in ways she hadn't before. She discussed the work she was doing to understand her fear of abandonment and how it had influenced her behavior in relationships. I discussed my personal issues with feeling invisible and how moving away had helped me develop my own identity, apart from being Lena's younger sister. We spent hours by the pool, chatting about our future goals and our determination to break the toxic familial habits we grew up with. Lena revealed she was afraid to date again because she didn't trust herself to identify when she was slipping into compulsive behaviors. I told her that's what therapy is for, to help her acquire those skills. On Sunday morning, before we checked out, we sat on the balcony, drinking coffee and admiring the dawn. Lena thanked me for giving her another opportunity, and I said I was glad I did, but I could genuinely sense she was working hard to change. As I drove home that Sunday afternoon, my car full of spa items and my body relaxed from the weekend, I felt incredibly positive about our future as sisters. We've both matured tremendously over the last year, working hard to understand ourselves and one another. The wedding day was painful, and I would not wish it on anybody, but it pushed us both to face facts we had been avoiding our whole lives. Instead of pretending everything was all right, Lena had to confront her mental health difficulties and get proper treatment. To avoid confrontation, I needed to learn how to set boundaries and quit limiting myself. Sometimes the most difficult periods in life lead to the most significant progress, and I'm thankful we both had the fortitude to complete the hard work of mending. Our relationship will always have the scars of what transpired, but they are now part of our story. They remind us of how far we've come and what we've learned. I turned up the music and pulled down the windows, feeling the warm air pour through the car.